Migrating to Australia podcast, the only podcast tackling all sorts of adjunct issues for those who migrate to Australia or want to migrate to Australia. I'm Grant Williams, pushing buttons, twiddling knobs, and joined all the time by Australia's foremost and, I was going to say funniest, but I'm not sure you're the funniest lawyer going around.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, Grant. How are you, mate?
Really great. Principal of David Bongiorno and Associates. And David, we're going to talk about something today that I don't think anybody who is doing a podcast would go, I'm going to put this topic down on my top 10 list.
It's an important
10.
topic. It should be top 10. We've got Lyndon Holland all the way from Adelaide. He is an expert advisor from CBD Insurance to talk about insurance for businesses, insurance for individuals. Lyndon, how are you?
Good afternoon, David and Grant. Thank you. I'm great.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Lyndon. And I'm going to assume that you've been pretty busy in the wake of bushfires. Now, Adelaide-based, you would have probably had clients on Kangaroo Island. Would I be right?
Yeah, we did. And fortunately for us, none of our clients had issues with the fires on Kangaroo Island, but Kangaroo Island was devastated. We have a business that extends from the west coast all the way up the east coast and into the north of Australia and back down to the south. So we've been impacted by everything, by the fires, the hailstorms and COVID.
Amazing. Now, David, why did you think that Lyndon would be a great person to talk to?
I wanted Lyndon to come on and talk about insurance because when people open businesses in Australia, I want them to be aware of all issues, all things of importance. And that's why I wanted Lyndon to talk, because, Lyndon, most of the people who listen to us listen offshore. And when they open businesses in Australia, what do they need to know from an insurance perspective?
Well, it's an important question to ask. I mean, from an insurance perspective, they need to make sure that they have identified their risks and insure against the risks that they can't cover themselves by transferring the risk to an insurance company.
What are some of the risks?
There are lots of risks. There's liability risks. So, for example, let's say I start a jewellery store in Melbourne or Sydney and somebody walks into that store and they fall over and hurt themselves. There's a liability risk there, which they will be held liable. There's theft and there's fire. There's fraud, there's management liability, and one of the big ones is the cyber liabilities today because a lot of people have been working online. So the last few weeks, the cyber crime has increased and there has been something like 230,000 hits per minute in the world on cybercrime as COVID is going through.
Are you kidding? They're phenomenal statistics. Grant.
Lyndon, just on cybercrime, I'm always amazed at how many people don't take basic precautions with their own cybersecurity, that they don't have anti-spyware or antivirus sort of software, and that they're completely unaware about how intrusions can work on their home Wi-Fi and things like that. Business is no different to personal people in being unaware when it comes to small businesses and cafes with their little hotspots and things like that. In your experience, how often or how many of your clients are completely unprepared for some of the activities that they take on from a security point of view?
Oh, Grant, we could talk about this one for hours. You know, some of the biggest companies in the world have been hit by cybercrime, and I named two of them, T and Toll.
Yeah.
Had massive hits in America and it shut them down. Now, they're not alone in this. Small business and personal, like yourself and I, are also at risk of this coming across our desks. What happens is that they send an email that you might open unawares. It could look like it's come from a friend or whatever. It puts something onto your computer and then watches you, and it watches passwords, credit cards, and personal information. Only last year we had a radiologist around the corner who was held to ransom for a week, and the ransom was $100,000, and if not, that they were going to then provide people's personal medical information. The biggest problem with that is if the radiologist decided that he was going to pay the person who was holding him to ransom, could he be charged with actually funding terrorism? And when I tell people that, they look at me and they go, what are you talking about? A lot of these people that do this are funding terrorism. So therefore, if I've funded terrorism, whether I know or not, I've committed a federal offence, and it's a jailable offence. And in some countries, it's an offence that could end up lifetime in jail. So you've got to be really careful that you don't just go and pay these people, because they do keep a backdoor on your computer. We've had computer people say to us, do you know, my system is monitored 24/7. There's no way known people can get in. That's just not true when you're dealing with companies like Toll and TNT, Patrick Stevedore, and some of the other companies that have been hacked. And they will try and they'll go anywhere. The White House has even been looked at. And locally here in South Australia, we had an email that actually exposed some people's personal information. It didn't lead to anything, but it was still exposed. So it's a very dangerous, very lucrative game, and people are making money out of it. People panic and say, well, they'll give me back all my information and do that. No, once you're in there forever. So be really careful. And if you're insured for it, your insurance company will take over. They'll do the negotiations, and they will make sure that you recover everything and they haven't put a back door in there.
And Lyndon,
did the radiologist have a happy ending?
In the end, the insurance company dealt with it, but the radiologist just said, well, you know, I felt like just paying for them because it shut my business down and I wanted to keep going. When I explained to him that if he was found funding a terrorist, it could end up in all hell, he kind of sort of understood. A lot of us in Australia don't understand because we haven't been exposed to it a lot, but we're being exposed a lot more today to all these scams.
And that's a really important point that you've made, Lyndon, that there are a whole lot of laws surrounding what happens online that just normal people are not aware of. And so a salient warning really is that if you receive some kind of ransomware demand, you must report it to the police just to protect yourself. Because if any money flows to those people, you are open to a whole lot of other actions. So that's fair enough, isn't it? That people just need to report anything like that to the authorities. And don't click on links in emails unless you know who it's from and why you got it.
Yeah.
Lyndon, 2 quantity surveyors come to you. They're from England. They've got permanent residency and they want to open their own quantity surveying business. What would you make them aware of? They've come from England, so they're new in Australia. They've got permanent residency. They're highly skilled. What would you say to them?
Great question. What they would need to do is, of course, they'd have to be registered in Australia and make sure that they meet our standards and our needs. Then they would need to sit down and identify their risks. So you'd sit them down side by side and say, what are the risks? And you identify a risk by the resultant damage. What is it that could impact me the most? And then I'll work back and say, well, what's the likelihood and consequence of that particular risk? Most risk registers should identify maybe 6 or 7 risks. And then you have all the other channels that are attached to that in your matrix. So first of all, understand what your risk is, identify your risk, and then address everything around those risks.
What are the 6 or 7 major risks?
Well, depending on the occupation. So if you look at a conveyancer, the risk is losing their authority. That's the biggest risk. So loss to their income, loss to their license, not being able to trade. And what is the cause for that? A lot of companies and a lot of people look at risks as the cause. So they say, for example, an insurance company might say, well, a cyclone is the risk. No, it's the cyclone hitting, causing damage, ripping up houses and cars and everything else. That's the risk. It's the resultant damage. And that's where a lot of people just don't understand what a risk is.
With something like a cyclone or another natural disaster, what are the most common causes or the most common losses that people in business, particularly if we take the house out of the equation, what are the most common losses for business that from the kind of natural disasters that we have in Australia? And if we just take away the obvious thing of the loss of the premises, what are the other things that are involved?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the loss of the premises is the bigger one. I guess the problem is, how are they going to continue to trade and where are they going to go? Are they able to relocate quickly? A lot of businesses don't have business interruption insurance, and that is insurance designed to make sure that you can continue to trade. You might lose trade because you've had to move. You might lose trade because you can't replace what was there. So, for example, let's say I make spa baths and the moulds to those spa baths were in those premises and those spa bath moulds were destroyed. However, they were made in Italy, and for me to get them, it's going to take 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 months for them to first of all make them again, and then take 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months for them to get here. So it could be 12 months before I could start to produce those moulds and those spa baths again. A lot of people just don't look at that risk. They don't look at what would happen if this has happened. And a lot of insurance brokers don't also identify those issues. It's a big problem we have in Australia where most of businesses are underinsured for business interruption insurance.
How do you educate these businesses, Lyndon? Do they come to you? Do you come to them? How do you let them know they're underinsured?
David, that's a controversial question for me because I can only explain it one way, and there's nothing meant in this, but they're ignorant to what insurance is and what their potential losses or risks are. I'm as blunt as a sledgehammer, when I tell people that this is their risk, they just look at me and go, it's never going to happen to me. And the typical Australian goes, she'll be right, mate, no problems at all. It's never going to happen to me. And then next week it happens to them. How do you tell them? You appeal to them the best you possibly can, and you become their trusted advisor. So it's a difficult thing to get across the line. I know some of the top 100 companies in Australia that are not correctly insured. So it's right across the board from big business to the individual expert or tradesperson.
So okay, somebody opens a beautiful Indian restaurant down in Port Adelaide from India. What do they need to do? Take us through what they would need to be correctly insured and appropriately insured against all problems.
Okay, so this is where a lot of people get confused. The property owner would insist on insurance for the building for fire and liability. The property owner and the operator both have different liabilities, so they both need insurance. And this is an argument a lot of brokers and a lot of people will argue, no, they're the same, we've got liability, that's it. That is not correct. The roof falling in down on top of you is very different to the risk of food poisoning causing an outbreak, causing death or illness. Two totally different risks. So what they do need to do, they need to engage a broker or a risk advisor, identify their risks. So restaurants, that's a big one for restaurants. A lot of them identify the risk as food poisoning. It's actually the outbreak causing the problem, causing death or causing illness. So they need to identify that. The risks in restaurant, they can have a look at other risks, whether I've got a fiscal risk or a trading risk, whether I've got a competition risk, and is that going to put me out of business? How am I going to do this or how am I going to do that? Not insurable risks, but different risks. So you need to be able to identify them properly. So if I was the person coming over to start an Indian restaurant in Port Adelaide, I would engage a qualified practicing insurance broker. I would sit down and identify my risks, whether it be to the bank or a lender, what the risks are for fire, what the risks are for injury, illness, food poisoning, and those sorts of things. Delivery today and everything. So everything needs to be addressed, and you need to take on the risks you can afford to, and those that you can't transfer to an insurance company.
policies. Now, are they all encompassing, or do you have different policies?
Policy wordings and policies are very different depending on who underwrites it, and that's the insurer, depending on
Have we lost
what
Lyndon?
group.
You there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We've
No.
just lost you, David, I think.
Yeah.
We've lost contact.
Lyndon,
Yes.
keep going with that about the policies while we wait and see what happens with David. Well, there he's gone. Lyndon, with it's been terrible today. This is the first day we've had significant issues, and today is just shocking. Now I've got to let him back in. Yes,
Here we go.
In. Can you hear us again, David?
Grant, I can hear you. Lyndon, I can hear you.
Great. Okay.
That question, I don't know if it was lost, but is it one policy with multiple elements, or do you take out separate policies for each event?
Depending on the risk. I mean, if you're talking about a business risk, you might take out what we call a biz pack, which is a business package for insurance for your particular business. So you might get a particular insurer who might do some of it. You might get one who does all of it. Vero, for example, is very good at restaurants. They cover all of that. However, if you've got somebody who has plant and equipment and they hire their plant and equipment out, you have several different risks. So you might have to go to several different companies. Sometimes when we go online and we do online insurance, the insurer on the other side is not getting the full picture. Whilst they're asking questions, you're answering them to the best of your ability. When it comes to a claim, that's really when you know how good your insurance policy is. And they're one of the issues we have when people say insurance companies don't pay. It's because we didn't understand what we were completing, and if we went to a broker, we'd be in a much better position. Policies, and I sometimes do divide one company into 4 or 5 different insurers because they have different definitions or a better experience when it comes to a claim.
Lyndon, when I was much younger, growing up, insurance was pretty much invisible. But in recent times, insurance has become ubiquitous. You cannot escape insurance advertising on TV. And I'm not going to name companies or identify products, but I'm sure you are aware of what I'm talking about. Has the easy access of the one phone call or click online to get covered, has that made the situation better or worse for the insurees, for the people who need insurance?
Okay, so it's one of the things I talked about a little bit earlier when you're doing online insurance and those sorts of things. Beware, because their questions are limited and the products are limited. I will give you an example where one insurance company will issue a policy document to a broker, and when you do it online, it has a much shorter version to what the broker has. And people say, well, the insurance company said my premium was $1,000 and you want $4,000. Why? Well, because we have better definitions. We have a bigger scope. We have sub-limits, which is something they add on to the bottom of it. And we are able to do this for you. And again, I can't say it enough. You only know how good your insurance is when it comes time to claim. And through a broker, you've got a much better chance of having it settled quickly and easily. Some of these online things and some of these TV things, and like you, I'm not going to name them. If you Google them and you Google those companies and have a look at some of the terrible things that have come up in the Royal Commission and investigations and other bits and pieces, you'll start to understand that there are issues with them. Now, one of them has in their motor vehicle policy a definition. If you go with outside the 30-kilometre radius of your home, registered car parking area, you are no longer covered under our policy. If you go interstate, particularly into the bigger CBDs, your policy will not respond. So you're not aware of them. And as an insured, You're not going to know that because we are ignorant. We don't read the policy wording. We don't understand the policy wording. It's written by lawyers for lawyers so that lawyers can continue to be lawyers and other bits and pieces. It's always so confusing. In my opinion, it needs to get better, and it is. We're starting to change it. The government are now stepping in and they're implementing change that will be better for the consumer. They're doing it at the cost or the peril of the insurance companies, so they need to be very wary with that as well. There's got to be some middle ground. But what's coming along, they're taking out unfair contracts of insurance policies. Insurance policies have been exempt from unfair contracts. Next year, unfair contracts becomes a part of insurance. So it will change claims and payments. It'll change the face of insurance.
That can only be described as a good thing, can't it? Because if I buy a toaster and I plug it in and put toast in and it actually turns into a flamethrower, that's not fit for use. Now, having a motor vehicle insurance policy that doesn't insure you nearly everywhere would seem to me to be not fit for use. It just seems crazy that's been allowed. And I think that people don't understand that what we would expect to be reasonable in every other aspect of life has not really applied to insurance contracts, probably a lot of contracts, but insurance particularly. So your words about being aware exactly what you are being insured for is salient, but sadly, it hasn't really been at the forefront of the industry in the past, has it?
No, it hasn't. And listen, it's great for the consumer, and that's where it should be. What is not good for the consumer is it's going to be priced accordingly. So it's going to take that into account. So it will increase premiums. The last 3 disasters that we've seen will increase premiums. We're starting to see premiums increase 300 or 400%. And in today's times, that is really difficult for some people to actually cope with. A lot of what's happened in the last 6 or 8 weeks is a lot of companies have denied claims based on COVID and an exclusion under the Quarantine Act. So, look, there's a lot of grey areas. I believe in insurance, and insurance has always treated me and my clients very well. The face of it is all going to change really quickly.
People, you talked, Lyndon, about Australian and their she'll be right, mate attitude. Are there any other Aussies of different cultural backgrounds that have a sort of similar carefree attitude to insurance?
Yeah, look, I mean, worldwide, you tend to see this attitude a little bit. Looking at what happens in the UK and looking at what's happened at the US, if you have a look at the New York Times or you have a look at insurance news coming out of the United Kingdom, you start to see that they have similar sorts of issues in insurance and they're all trying to address it. I've just been exposed to China in the last couple of years, and some of the companies that are going into China are having now issues when it comes to claims or not understanding cultures and not understanding how it should work. So it's a really interesting time what's happening in Southeast Asia with some of these international insurance companies going in there and offering products, especially China, because it's now opening up.
Have you got some horror stories to tell us, some horror stories of people who don't take out insurance? Have you got some local and national examples to sort of emphasise the point of taking out appropriate insurance?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they come on big scales and smaller scales. And a lot of people, there are people that say, insurance companies are quick to take your money. They're very slow to pay out. If they pay out, that's not quite my experience. But I'll give you one. Sydney Airport had a big issue when it came to the runway, and there was an incident at the runway and it cost the builder $20 million. They weren't insured for it. The insurance companies denied it, and that builder had to fork out $20 million out of their own pocket. So that's a really big issue and problem in underinsurance or incorrect insurance. To go positively now, last year I had $12 million paid to an individual for a terminal illness that he contracted 4 or 5 years ago, and it's made a big difference to his life. So it works both ways sometimes, and most of it is ignorant insureds and ignorant brokers or ignorant insurance companies. For example, insurance companies fight each other over liabilities, people are underinsured, and this is where I will not take on anybody unless they take my advice, because it's just not worth it.
That would be a very good way to operate for all kinds of professionals, wouldn't it, David? You don't want to be involved attempting to represent a client in their own best interest. If they are refusing to act on the advice that they are given.
Absolutely. It's very technical. Do clients, business clients, individual clients understand how technical insurance is?
No, I mean, insurance is very confusing, and I believe the ASIC and the AFCA, which is the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, and the Australian Financial Complaints Authority are looking at ways to simplify it. Some of the senators have turned around and said insurance should have a basic product where everybody has the basics insured, and from there you can add value, removing the uncertainty. Insurance policies have uncertainty throughout them in their definitions. I'm a great believer in insurance, and I believe that insurance should be mandatory for everybody. That will do a few things: make sure that you're covered and reduce the premiums that we're all paying. So it has a positive for everybody.
And of course, we do all have insurance, don't we, Lyndon? It's just not understood that that's what it is. And in Australia, it's our medical services. When you go to the doctor or when you go to hospital and you don't have to fork over money for the service, it's because as a nation, we pay into an insurance scheme that funds our medical industry.
Yeah, and it's a great thing to have, and it has been a wonderful thing, Medicare, and it's had some confusing issues over the years as to how it operates and what it responds to and what it doesn't respond to. But it certainly has been an interesting product when it was rolled out, and it was rolled out, I think, in the 70s. I can't remember when it was rolled out, but I believe that's what insurance should be like, yes.
Well, we had Medibank Mark 1 under Whitlam, and then we got Medicare under Hawke. So
that's it.
I think it came into effect in, 85. Okay. The election was 83, it was developed 84, and I think we started using it in 85. So, yeah. And
Lyndon,
too political, the other side have always tried to wind it back.
Yeah.
Lyndon, somebody's listening to the podcast and they've been operating underinsured for a number of years, and they had their epiphany listening to you, and they come to you. What do you do with someone who's been operating underinsured for a long period?
Underinsurance, I mean, you obviously address that because some policies do have a formula which penalise you for underinsurance. So if you decide to take on the risk or some of the risk yourself without having the insurance company agree to it, you'll actually be penalised. So $1 million claim could end up being something like $600,000 or $700,000 in your pocket. So you could be penalised $200,000 or $300,000. It's not a risk you want to take. We see a lot of people that insure their houses based on a valuation. It should be based on what the value to replace that building is from head to toe, including bathrooms, including curtains, including flooring, stairwells and footings. So a lot of people, when you turn around and say, well, you're only insuring your house for $500,000, we actually think it should be insured for $700,000. They go, oh, no, that's not what the real estate agent says it's worth. I'm not doing that. So it's underinsurance, and you can get penalised for it, and it will hurt.
Now, you're penalised in the event of a claim, but do you top up a policy that's underinsured, or do you take out new insurance entirely?
No, you should consider your options and look at the options and see what's in that particular policy. You can top it up and go back to the insurer, provided that there is no clause in the policy that says we have the right to recover under insurance premiums. Householders doesn't quite in there, but some business insurance does, that says, we have the right to recover under insurance. One of those typical of that is medical indemnity insurance. So if you're a GP and you've disclosed an income of $1 million a year and your income's actually $2 million a year, they have a right to recover the difference in premium between that $1 million and $2 million a year turnover. And when you go back to people and they say that, they get horrified, and it could be horrifying. We've seen people not disclose their income or just left it for years and years and end up with a $50,000 or $60,000 bill or a surprise. So it's really important to address it every year. Make sure it is up to date every year. Your broker should contact you every year, and you should give them the 5 minutes of the day that they need to make sure that you are protected properly by answering half a dozen questions.
And it's not just business owners and businesses. I mean, do these policies and these principles apply to employees as well?
I'm not sure. Yes, it does. Well, I mean, the employer, if it's business insurance, would include the employees. One thing that people do get caught on, David, is contractors. And are contractors employees? And in Western Australia, it's a bit different to South Australia and Victoria and New South Wales. So you've got to have a look at the state legislation and how it handles it. So in Western Australia, if you're a contractor and you're working for somebody, that contractor who's contracting you must pay your work cover. And the tax office has a definition of personal services income tax. If you are working for one employer and all your income is generated from that one employer, you are actually an employee, not a contractor, and therefore you should not be issuing GST invoices or claiming GST and purporting to be a company or a contractor. So it's confusing right around federal and state. They all have a little bit of a difference.
I think it's even more difficult than that, Lyndon. I think if you derive the majority of about 80% of your income from one employer, but you have 5 or 6 other people that you work for, I think you still get deemed by the tax department to be an employee. And that was a question I was going to ask you. What kind of determination is made about who is an employee and who is a contractor? Is it from the kind of definition the tax department would use, or is it a labour relations kind of law definition? How do you sort it out? Because it can be different depending on the context that it's being used.
Sure. And I think what you need to do, Grant, is you need to apply best practice. You need to say, what is the federal legislation? Because as we know, if challenged, federal legislation overrides state legislation 9 times out of 10. So we need to be careful. And I go back to Western Australia because I could be an electrician. I could be asked to fulfill a contract for a builder to fit the wiring and then commission the wiring. And therefore, under work cover in Western Australia, I'm treated as an employee. When it comes to what you said about the 80% rule, it's very true. I mean, if 80% of my income is derived from one particular place, then I am personal services income. I'm actually deemed to be an employee. And what I'm doing wrong there is working, or from an insurance point of view, I could be doing something that's illegal. I need to be careful that I'm not breaking the law. And I need to be not ignorant. And I don't mean that to be rude, but I need to ask the question. Insurance companies will void policies if I'm doing something illegal, even whether I'm ignorant or not, because ignorance is, not even taken into account. So it's an interesting question. You need to be really careful. You need to ask your broker. You need to pass it by your lawyer. And today you need to almost pass everything by your lawyer and your broker and make sure you've got all the right questions to protect yourself.
You've got decades of experience and you're highly qualified, and you're presently doing a degree in financial planning.
Yes, I'm currently doing a master's degree in applied finance. So I've got 5 advanced diplomas, and now I'm told I haven't got enough experience and I need to increase my education. So I'm doing a master's of applied finance, yes.
Do you think there's a danger? I mean, I'm in immigration law, and the barriers to entry are quite high. How high are the barriers of entry into your field of advising for entrepreneurs and the self-employed in terms of insurance? Are the barriers of entry high?
No, I don't think the barriers of entry are high. I think it's understanding what it is. Sometimes the barriers are cost. And if you're a startup, like you suggested might be, sometimes the cost factor outweighs the income, and it's just not sustainable. So I think the industry needs to look at that and decide that they can actually, how do they fund that? A lot of people, and I was speaking to some the other day, business coaches that were setting up a new business, they're doing an online program and they've decided to go without insurance because the $1,500 a year wasn't sustainable because they hadn't turned over a cent. So it's really important. Sometimes it's a necessary evil. Without it, and you get caught, you can be destroyed. And literally, I mean that. So trying to get it sometimes can, make things difficult for you as well.
Lyndon, you reminded me of something that we haven't done, that the information contained within this podcast is general in nature and should not be taken as specific legal advice.
Well done, Grant.
We are discussing general situations. We are not providing specific advice that anybody should act on. Of course, if you need to do something, if you need to take some action, you need to speak with a certain kind of person like a Mr. David Bongiorno or a Mr. Lyndon Holland.
Now, Lyndon, because it's essentially federal law, you can assist and advise people all over the country, correct?
Yes.
And so people mustn't be concerned that geographically you're in Adelaide and they're in Cairns, for example.
Sure. And I mean, we've got several clients in Cairns. So Cairns was a great example for me. Faster Pastor there in Cairns, we look after, with many other businesses up there in Cairns, tradespeople, shops, restaurants, retailers. So Cairns is a great spot and I love to visit it once or twice a year. So we certainly do. We extend our arm. We have a large practice in Western Australia. We've extended into Victoria, into the CBD of Melbourne, and we go as far up as Bundaberg in Queensland. So we certainly do Australia-wide. Because of Zoom and because of everything electronically over the last few months, it's much easier to reach out to people electronically. And we've been doing it now for 4 or 5 years. So there's no boundaries as far as that's concerned. We can actually do things worldwide. We certainly deal with worldwide insurance companies. So there's no boundary there whatsoever. So they should reach out to us, yes.
Oh, no, David's gone again. Oh no. Well, good we got to that point. Lyndon, do you... Oh, here we go. I've got to let him in again. Here we are.
Dying.
David, can you hear us again?
I can hear you, Grant. Lyndon, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Lyndon, sort of pertinent more to our listening audience rather than the population in general, are there any cultures that are particularly resistant to the need to take out particularly commercial insurance in Australia and operating under Australian conditions?
Yeah, look, I think, again, some of the cultures don't understand that it is required under law, and under the Corporations Act, you must take every step to protect your company and the interests of your shareholders. Under the Corporations Act, it could be, and you could be criminally charged if something goes wrong and you haven't made every attempt to protect it, and that means insurance. So some people do look at insurance as a necessary evil. Some of them look at it as not necessary. It won't happen to me. A lot of immigrants look for their national persons. So people from China look for people from China here in Australia who are practicing in the industry and other countries. So it's great that they're expanding into that. They do need to understand that sometimes culturally or sometimes countries are different to other countries, and it's not mandatory. If you're going to be a business owner or a director, a proprietor, it becomes mandatory in Australia, unlike some other places around the world.
David, do you have a follow-up on that issue about cultural resistance?
Lyndon makes a very valid point in terms of, let's use the Chinese as an example. Here, an advisor broker who speaks Mandarin and Cantonese is going to be a far more suitable choice unless you have the language yourself. Do you have multilingual staff in your business?
That's an interesting question. We certainly do have the option of Mandarin speaking people. They are not advisors. So for us, we are moving into now an area in which we're trying to employ somebody in the area. We've got quite a few people who have put their hands up and interested in coming on board with us who do speak Mandarin and Cantonese. And it really is important because as a broker, you need to understand the insured. And if there's a cultural or a translation issue, and there's often a translation issue, you as the broker are responsible. So it's my responsibility to understand them. And if I have a cultural or a translation issue and it ends up being a problem when it comes time to claim, I'm going to be responsible, not them. So it's really important to make sure that that translation issue is fixed. And the only way to do that is to have somebody who speaks the same language.
Your passion for insurance is palpable. It's you just can feel it and hear it and see it. You're talking about next year being not a brave new world, but how is next year going to be different?
Listen, as we move through COVID, I think you'll find a lot of things will change and a lot of things will be different. Insurance companies have been hammered by the fires. They've been hammered by Senate inquiries. They've been hammered by floods, and we've had hail and now COVID. And it's worldwide, wherever you go around the world. It's going to change because definitions are going to change. The senators in their Senate inquiry are going to fight for the consumer. The insurance companies are going to fight for survival. Without the insurance company or companies, we'll be in big trouble. So sustainability of insurance companies is really important. I believe today the government should reach out to insurance companies and say, we know you're under financial pressure. We will provide that financial support because we need a sustainable industry. Then making it sustainable like they did in the GFC for banks, they guaranteed deposits in banks. They need to do something for the insurance companies now and support them now and provide support for small business. Otherwise, this COVID is going to take us through for another year. People are talking about September, October, which I started talking about in February. I'm now looking and readjusting it to probably March or April next year. We haven't seen the knock-on effect. And when people bag the Treasurer about a $60 billion surplus, I just don't think we've realised where we're going to be in a few months' time. We haven't actually identified the knock-on, and we're starting to see small businesses fail terribly now and not have any support at all. So, where do you go?
Lyndon, this has been a fantastic session. Thanks for coming on. Grant, you got any more questions?
I guess, Lyndon, I'm hesitant. I'm not sure how to put this, but people usually think insurance agents they're portrayed on TV as either being boring or bumbling and accidental, stupid. What does Lyndon do when he's not being passionate about insurance?
Well, the last 5 or 6 weeks, all I've done is eat, live, breathe insurance and helped my clients out of trouble. What does Lyndon do? Lyndon does lots of things. So Lyndon has 3 children. Lyndon has a dog. I have a Chinese partner. I have a family who live around the corner. So we do lots of social things. Sailing, I enjoy doing, traveling. There's lots of different things in this world that I like to do. And I love to be invited out to try something new. And some of those things that I've tried out new is abseiling and bungee jumping. Now I'm looking forward to skydiving, which I'm going to talk my friend David into doing with me, and some other challenges in the world. So I've got a bucket list and I am slowly ticking them off.
Good job. The skydiving, I tip my hat. I mean, you live in the most beautiful state in the country. Is there any internal travel you'll be doing while travel bans are on?
Well, I think the best thing is that even hire car companies and that have had big issues, limousines and those sorts of things. So we're starting to see them offer packages to the Barossa and to the other wine regions in South Australia at a really discounted price because they want to increase their revenue. They want to get some sort of revenue. So I think next weekend being the long weekend, we might actually just hop into a limo and just drive through Clarendon or the McLaren Vale or the Clare Valley or the Barossa. So, yeah.
Beautiful. I have a weakness for Robe. I think Robe's one of the most beautiful towns in the country. Yeah. Did you get to Robe?
Yeah, I have been there on a few times, and the great big lobster and everything else through Robe. What a magnificent place down there on the Coorong.
Oh, the Coorong's exquisite. You'd love the Coorong for the birds.
Yes.
Know the Coorong well, but Lyndon, I'd love to see you take a limousine somewhere particular. I'd like to see you rock up to Kimber in a limousine.
Yeah, so Kimber's such a rural area in South Australia. I was actually brought up in Whyalla, which is an industrial steelworks town. So Kimber's not far away. A lovely little town. I've been there 3 or 4 times in my lifetime. In fact, I've still got family that live there.
Mate, if you turned up there in a limousine, they'd still be talking about it 20 years from now.
They would.
Lyndon,
yeah.
Thanks for coming on, Lyndon. Have a good afternoon, mate.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, Grant. It was a pleasure to meet you. And David, you enjoy your weekend as well.
You too, Lyndon. And I'm presuming that being of the Adelaide professional class, I would have to say to you, go Crows.
That's right. Yeah, go the Crows. Speak to you soon. Thank you, guys.
See you, mate. Ciao.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
It's my favourite state in the country. I love it. It's a beautiful state.
Mate.
Aesthetically, it's just divine. South Australia's a beautiful state.
Mate, there's news. Hang on, I'll just end the broadcast.
Has somebody sent us a message?
No, before I give you my news, I don't want to put this out everywhere. So thanks for everyone who wasn't watching.
No, but people listen. That's all.